I want you to come with me tonight as I go back on a very personal journey using DNA to trace my roots. My ancestors probably hit these very beaches hundreds of years ago. On slave ships packed between death and human waste, many didn't make it. My ancestors did. They survived being split up and sold off from their families. Despite the evils of the time, they survived slavery. But that's not where my story begins, and thanks to DNA, now I can prove it. My father's family has spent the last 100 years around Florence, South Carolina. My grandfather, Walter James Sr., worked on the railroad. His father, Streeter James, was a sharecropper with African features so strong, you'd think he was one of the first off the slave ships.
That's all I've heard all my life. We came from Africa.
But without official documents, the road to our African roots goes nowhere. In this country, I'm a black man. I know about my American heritage, but it took a trip to Washington, D.C. to learn about my African roots.
We know psychologically that knowing where you're from is a very important component of knowing who you are. And as African Americans, we're the only group in this country who can't point to a country of origin.
Gina Page is president of African Ancestry. She and a geneticist, Dr. Rick Kittles, teamed up to turn DNA lineage testing into a one-of-a-kind business.
What proof do I have that you didn't just go to a board with a bunch of African names and throw darts at it and say, you're it?
The fundamental proof of our company is based in Dr. Kittle's academic reputation. He has a long-standing career as a genetics researcher, has published several papers.
It works like this. You send off for a test and swab the inside of your cheek. Once you send the packet back, your DNA is compared to a database of more than 25,000 African lineages from 30 different countries.
You have 3 billion of these in every cell of your body, and we looked at 400 of them.
I inherited DNA from both my parents. The mitochondrial DNA from my mother will tell where her mother, grandmother, and so on originated. The Y chromosome from my father will show the lineage of his father's father, etc. However, because some African women were raped by their slave masters, there's a 30% chance that my ancestry could come back European, not African.
It's very important to understand that just because you may have European ancestry or Asian ancestry doesn't mean you're not African American. You get to define yourself however you want, and we're just giving you tools or pieces of information to do with what you need.
For hundreds of years, the mystery of our origin had been secretly tucked away in the folds of our own DNA. And now, the moment of truth.
And we found that you share maternal ancestry with people living in.
It's an emotional journey. It's not over yet.
I can't wait. And we found that you share maternal ancestry with people living in Nigeria today. We traced your paternal ancestry, and we found that that ancestry is found just outside of Equatorial Guinea.
The words hung in the air, looking for a place to land. I heard her, but it took a second to sink in. All my life, I had claimed Africa. Now, suddenly, 2 very specific parts of her were claiming me back.
And when we looked and compared your sequence to the sequences in our database, we found this exact same sequence. In Nigeria, every single letter matches.
It turns out my mom's people are Yoruba.
My initial reaction was, who are the Yoruba people?
The Yoruba come from southwest Nigeria, and historians consider Yoruba sculptures among Africa's greatest artistic achievements.
This is actually a part of me that I never thought that I would get to know.
My dad's family comes from the Booby people. Watch it, Pop. The Boobies are from Bioko Island. They grew palms, yams, and were fishermen, and music was vital to life.
When I looked at the other side, in terms of the agriculture side, the kind of food they grew and what the people like. And no wonder I love bananas. No wonder I love yams and peanuts and all kinds of, I just love it. I just can't help myself. And now, it's in the history. It's in the genes.
It helps me to realize who I am, where I came from, then I know where I'm going.
My Aunt Nora and her son Walter James III are the family historians.
I'm floored.
For obvious reasons, they were all impressed, but my cousin came up with a not-so-obvious potential use for the results.
It also could play a part if the U.S. government ever decides to give reparations. If we can trace our ancestry back to slavery, then that would be our documentation to say that, yes, we are entitled to reparations.
Reparations or no, America owes a huge debt to the African slave. The contributions of the Bubi, Yoruba, and countless others are many. Their bloodlines have survived slavery, the Civil War, and civil rights. The other day, a friend asked, "Why do you want to know where you came from?" My answer's rather simple, so I'll know who to thank.